Hello and welcome back to Woke Nation. Tonight we're going to talk about the medical system because I just had kind of a lengthy experience with it, and not a very good one, as you'll find out. Um, Traditionally in America, we can always say that our healthcare system is better than most healthcare systems. Now, there are people that will dispute that, like Bernie Sanders and some others. But generally speaking, there is no denying that if you're going to have healthcare coverage or go to a doctor or go to a hospital, far better you do it in America than in, say, Guam or Belize or Cuba. Although I think what's that fat liberal dude? I can't remember his name. He wrote the book Stupid White Men. Michael, whatever. Anyway, it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, he went down to Cuba and he took a bunch of Americans who were denied coverage here in America on a boat down to Cuba, and they all got free health care there because it's a communist system. The obvious reality, though, is that in a communist system, there is no incentive for doctors to actually be good at their work. Everybody gets the same level of care regardless of what you pay. But that's not necessarily good care. It's all just mediocre care because it's meted out by your tax dollars. And doctors are not actually paid according to whether they're good or not. They're just paid by your tax dollars. So there's no incentive to produce good quality health care. Um, that being said, here in America, you would think that things would be a good deal different in our capitalist system, uh, but largely what I think has ruined the healthcare system in America has not been the need or the solution is not socialism. I don't think so, and we're always faced with these like either or dilemmas. Either you adopt socialism or what, or there's no answer. As if we can't rewind the clock back 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago before the insurance companies got their claws in the healthcare system. That's the problem. I think that one of the biggest problems, doctors are afraid to actually have a real meaningful one-on-one relationship with their patients. Most doctors cannot advocate really for their patients because they're bound by all these procedures and they're bound by the insurance companies, all these clauses. They have all these regulations handed down by the government so that if they tiptoe outside the line, they're facing a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit that could end their career. And it would have been their career because there's no privatized or very few privatized doctors anymore, but rather large hospitals that employ hundreds and thousands of individual doctors who largely do not from my experience, at least my recent experience, do not think outside the box, but rather are bound by a system. No matter how archaic that system may be, they're still bound by it, and they refuse to think outside the box. Case in point, we just had our daughter a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, and due to medication that she was on, she ended up in the NICU. The NICU is the wing in the hospital, special care unit for children, infants that are going through withdrawal off of medication. And it was prescribed medication, so it was okay, but it still, I mean, that's not something that's comfortable for the baby. But anyway, after 4 or 5 days of being in the hospital, um, the doctors realized that she had jaundice, and this is the beginning of when the nightmare happened for us, and just the what followed afterwards really poisoned kind of the way I view hospitals now. I mean, it was a maelstrom of incompetence and just bureaucratic crap. Um, Really, when it comes down to it, I mean, people that The individual nurses in our that we met and who took care of our daughter and everything while she was in the NICU, most of them were sweet and the nicest people in the world, but they were bound by a system that was created in the 1970s, and I'll get to that in a second. But that is so outdated and is being challenged across the country for how accurate it really is in recognizing withdrawal symptoms in a baby. Um, and these nurses, it was stunning at how little you get this constant parade of nurses, one right after another as their shifts change. Never the same. Very rarely do you get the same nurse taking care of your child. But just a revolving cycle of different people, each with their own method of dealing with the child. Who These nurses almost never communicate in between with each other, in between shifts. And this whole time they're supposed to be objectively scoring the child on her symptoms, whether she's withdrawing off of medication or not. The idea that you can do that is absolutely absurd, but I'll get to that in a second. So after the C-section and the baby came, our daughter, they kept her and my wife for 3 or 4 days in the hospital, and then they realized, well, they said she has to stay at least one day for observation in the NICU because they knew this medication was involved, and that's when they realized, oh wow, she actually has jaundice, and in order to deal with jaundice, they have to put her under these lights. I think it's called phototherapy. But these lights, I mean, in order to do that, you have to strip the baby down basically naked, put a blindfold on them, and then somehow get them to be calm and relaxed underneath these lights, which are really hot, and just have her lay there for hours and hours and hours and hours. Now, at the same time this was happening, this was happening in the NICU where they put her under these phototherapy lights for the jaundice. Um, the same time this happened, they're supposed to be observing her for any kind of signs or symptoms of withdrawal. And what they use is a system called the Finnegan system. It's a model, it's a chart. And they grade the child from a scale of 1 to, say, 12, 12 being extreme withdrawal symptoms, 1 being, negligible. And they score them. They gave us a copy of the sheet, so I know I read it. They score them from whether they spit up or not, whether supposedly that's a sign of withdrawal, whether you spit up or not. I mean, the chart itself was idiotic. It was like it was embarrassing that they put this together. And doctors outside of a Hershey Medical Center, when I showed them the chart or talked to them, were laughing at it. That's how bad it was. Whether the child they would score the child if she could not sleep for 4 hours at a time, and they would feed her every 4 hours. So they would feed her and then expect her to sleep from that point until the next feeding point, 3 to 4 hours later. Um, if she woke up or started to cry a little bit, they scored her for that. If she sneezed, they scored her for that. That's a sign of withdrawal, I guess. If she coughed, that was a sign of withdrawal. If she moved her head, like, now you swaddle a baby, and sometimes the cloth gets up on their chin. So if her head went like this and chafed her chin a little bit, that was a sign of withdrawal. I mean, it was the most inane, idiotic stuff I had ever seen. The problem with the scoring system is it was developed in the 1970s, and it is the most purely subjective scoring system I've ever seen in my entire life. I haven't seen a whole lot of them, I admit, and I have very little experience with the NICU. But this, I mean, you all of a sudden realize whether something's good or not when it's personal, and this is our daughter, so it was intensely personal. So to begin with, this nurse bumbles into the room and starts trying to put our daughter under the phototherapy lights. First off, She had no idea how to turn the machine on. She couldn't even get the thing working. I had to start the machine for her. And my dad's standing there, like, trying to show her how to plug the dang thing in. She couldn't even do that much. Um, and then when our daughter's thrashing around, miserable under these lights, and meanwhile she's scoring her with these scores of 10, 10, 10. And if you get more than 3 scores above 8, then they seriously consider putting her on like morphine or something to help wean her down off of her withdrawals, as a supplement, basically. And If you think this sounds like crazy and just so unusual, then you're not alone. So, without telling us, this nurse gives her like 3 scores of 10. Now, they score her every couple hours. So, for a couple hours, they're struggling with her to try to keep her calm underneath these lights, naked, with a blindfold on. The nurse couldn't even get the blindfold on correctly. She had the blindfold on backwards. Every time we tried to point stuff out to her, like the nurse, she would get defensive, upset, and eventually there was just a confrontation between her and my wife, and we got a doctor in there, and we said, this nurse has to leave now. Get her out. We don't ever want to see her again. She's an idiot. So they took her out. She couldn't even turn the machine on, and so this doctor comes in and she's like, "Wow, she's withdrawing. She needs to be put on morphine." And at the same time she's telling us this, we're faced with the fact that no matter what, I mean, for her health's sake, she has to be put under these lights, these phototherapy lights, for her jaundice. There's no way around it. That's how they treat it. That can be life-threatening. So we said to the doctor, "Okay, you'll give her 1 dose, maybe 2 doses of morphine to calm her down, and but that doesn't mean that you're going to be putting her on a continuous dose of morphine, because if they do that, then it could be weeks, because they have to slow. If they put her on more than just a couple, then all of a sudden, you're dealing with the withdrawal of the morphine as well, and then it can take up to week, depending on how high they would raise her morphine dose to get her to calm down. It could take weeks to wean her off of that so that she's not irritable and miserable and pooping water and throwing up and gagging and not able to eat during that time. So they have to do it very slowly, very gradually. And the entire time that they're gradually doing this thing, they're using the Finnegan 1970s subjective scoring system. It's madness. And so we said, we don't have many options here. She has to do the phototherapy. Give her 1 or 2 doses at most. But we don't want her to be here for weeks, so don't give her more than that. Oh, yeah, okay, 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 okay. Well, guess what? They started giving her doses without telling us, and raised her dose up, so, a couple milligrams or whatever it was. I don't have the chart in front of me of how high they put her. It wasn't that high comparatively speaking, but for her, it was enough so that she was there for weeks. And they did this without telling us and against our wishes. Which is insane, and I mean, it makes my blood boil just to think about it. Without being able to really have a say in it, and against our wishes, actually, now we're faced with this situation where she's on the morphine, and they're going to wean her off of it, and it's going to take a while. And what does that mean? How long could that be? Every day at 10 o'clock, doctors would come in and assess how she had been doing throughout the night and throughout the previous day. And what they would assess is this Finnegan 1970 scoring system. Now, bear in mind, this scoring system grades, her irritability, how she's sleeping, how long she's sleeping, how much she's eating, how irritable she is. I mean, I wish I had this thing in front of me, but I mean, whether she was sneezing more than 2 or 3 times, whether she coughed, whether her chin was chafed, just whether she spit up, just stupid stuff that every kid does. I mean, our daughter's been home for quite a while now. She's certainly not on any kind of medication or withdrawing or anything of the kind, and she sneezes all the time. All right, this is what children do. Our pediatrician said the same thing. There's my traditional hitting of the camera. Anyway, so uh, and part of the problem and what infuriated me and why we really started to get angry at these people is this subjective. You have this 1970s scoring system, Finnegan scoring system, which is, I went online right away when I realized what scoring system they were using, and I started reading up on it. Okay, what is this thing? Because right away I started to realize, there's a major problem here in that, um, if you want your kid to come home, but at the same time, you don't want them coming home too soon. It was confusing, and each nurse would contradict the other. You never got a clear message. One nurse would come in and say, "Oh, she sneezed. I had to score her for that." The next nurse would scratch her head and say, "Why did she score her for that?" And the next nurse would come in and score her for spitting up. The next nurse after that would come in and say, "Why did she score her for that?" There was no consistency whatsoever in the scoring system. Um, and adding to that is the purely subjective nature of it, so that you could score it how you wish. Uh, Irritability is subjective. How irritable was she? Well, here's part of the problem: is that irritability, lack of sleep, how much she feeds, all these things, they take zero into account. They do not take into account whatsoever when they're scoring your child, the environment that the child is in. She's hooked up to all these different wires and gadgets and machines which are constantly beeping throughout the night. She's having a cycle of nurses coming in and out of the room every couple hours, each with a different method, each with a different voice, each with a different attitude. I mean, to an infant, that is demoralizing to have some people that have different methods, different attitudes, different ways of trying to take care of her, different to feed her. One nurse may be really great about changing her diaper on time, the next nurse may not. And in the midst of all this confusion and machines going off and beeping, if her wire was not just right on her foot, the machine just do 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 do, and then she would wake up from her sleep, be irritable, and the nurse come in and have to start scoring her. I mean, it was the most idiotic, insane thing I have ever seen. And the real problem, the thing that really started to burn me up about it, was the condescending nature of these people. So when you would express your concerns to the nurses, a lot of times they would listen and be sympathetic and the like. Generally speaking, besides the one nurse that my wife had an issue with, most of them were nice and showed some signs of compassion and empathy. Yes, I understand you want to get your child out of here. But when we expressed frustration to any of the doctors, the medical superiors, there was this condescending attitude that was kind of passed down, like you don't understand what opiate withdrawal is now that she's on morphine and all this. I'm sorry. Anyone that's seen this YouTube channel and has seen the episodes I put out on my life story as far as addiction goes knows that if there's one thing I know in this world, it is the half-life of opiates, what opiate withdrawal is like. There is nothing I know better than that, sad to say. Or at least there was a time in my life where there was nothing I knew better than that. Thank God, thank the Lord that has changed. But and all due to His grace. But you know, eh, I at one point, a doctor came in and we were, really, I was getting really heated up, and she started to, it's science. When I started to tell her, she said the half life of morphine is days, so that we're going to have to keep her even after we take her off of the medication. We're going to have to keep her here for 72 hours because that's how long it could take before you start seeing withdrawal of morphine. And she got upset because I started laughing in her face as soon as she said that. Because and what I told her, I know for a fact that that's not true. That as soon as you remove morphine from somebody's body who's built up a tolerance for it, it's only a matter of hours, not even that long, before you can get withdrawal symptoms. It does not take 3 days. That is absolutely absurd. And to hold somebody's child for 3 days because of your incompetence and lack of knowledge on the topic is disgusting. And I started rolling my eyes and laughing at her, and the best she could come up with is, it's science. That was going to convince me. It's science. Um, my advice and to anyone that is going through that, whose child ends up in the NICU and has any sort of dependence, whether the mother is prescribed something, which happened in this case because of pain medication, or whatever, is to avoid at all costs any hospital that is using the Finnegan 1970 scoring system. What a lot of doctors are doing around the country now is, I think it's called ESC. That's the new system that they're using. And it's called Eat, Sleep, and Cuddle. And basically, they don't hook the children up to all these different machines and then wonder why they're irritable. They don't ask a child who cannot think or reason because they're 2 days old or a week old to go 4 hours without eating and not cry, or scoring them negatively because they only sleep 2 hours instead of 3.5, of all the insanity. And keep in mind that when they're scoring them this way, you could debate with them and argue with them, but the entire attitude they have was that I can voice my opinion, but it doesn't really matter. That was the attitude I had. And what it really came down to at the end was that both my wife and I had to really stand there with the doctors and tell them, you are absolutely not going to give her any more medication. And you are absolutely, when it came to the 72 hours that they were going to monitor her, I actually had a doctor standing there trying to tell me that if she gets a little irritable, we might have to put her back on the medication. And I had to restrain myself from saying, if you do that, I will launch you head first out this window, 7 floors up. Good luck on your landing. Um, but we had to tell them, like, absolutely not. If you do that, like, I'm going to come down on this place with the mother of all lawsuits. Like, we basically had to say that. At that point, then it was just, oh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. What's happened to our medical system when the wishes of parents who are the legal guardians of children are just trampled over, in the name of doctors, uh, who obviously, in the case of the NICU, I can't speak for the entire medical services at Hershey. The sad thing is that Hershey Medical Center, or Hershey Hospital in Hershey, PA, has an amazing reputation, and their NICU has a high reputation. Well, to hell with that. Their reputation is awful, and it deserves to be awful. Our experience there was people that viewed your child, not as an individual child, but in a general way. Children were children, not Emma or Sarah or Carl or Stephen or Nathan or whoever, or Cindy. They weren't infants with names and individual personalities that reacted in individual ways to certain circumstances. Instead, it was, a baby does this, and therefore I score your child this way. I mean, it got so bad, this that they would score your child and how they ate, right? So we discovered that our child, that what they would do is they would have two bottles when you fed them, they fed your child. The first bottle would have mother's milk, and the second one would have formula. Well, one of the nurses had continuously been trying to feed Emma, our daughter, using the formula bottle first. And for the first 15 minutes of her feeding her, Emma would just be, thrashing her head around, really struggling to take down any food. It was just a real battle to get her to eat. And then they're scoring her. Well, one day I came in there one evening and I just thought, for the heck of it, let's try using the bottle of mother's milk first. So we did that, and she downed it like a champ. Like, there was no problem at all. Like, there was no issue. And then followed right after that with the other bottle. So what we started to do was just mix the two bottles. Start with the formula, and then just start mixing in the milk, the mother's milk. Um, my wife's milk, as we were going, so that the two were blended, and if she didn't like one of them by itself, she wouldn't notice it. Well, as soon as we started to do that, her issue in feeding went away. Well, here's the problem. Nurses don't communicate with each other in between shifts whatsoever. You had to drill them on this kind of stuff before they would even remember it if you saw the same nurse again later on, which was rare. But The next nurse is coming on shift. You're well aware that she's going to be scoring this baby. How is she doing? And how she scores her determines the length of her stay and how fast she comes off the medication. Well, one of the things they score her on is how well she eats. Duh. Do they communicate at all that, hey, mix in the milk together with the formula and the baby eats just fine? So the struggling that we were having before wasn't actually withdrawal at all that we were scoring this whole time. It was a misdiagnosis. Did they communicate that between the nurses? No, not at all. They didn't. They didn't care. They just kept right on going, and no communication whatsoever. And so they would continue with this stupid scoring. Um, yeah, I mean, it was the most insane thing and most frustrating thing that I've ever gone through in my life. And the the thing that simple solution to all this, number one, and it seems that there are some doctors waking up around the country, is to adopt a system where you don't have machines going off, you don't have a revolving cycle of nurses who don't communicate with each other taking care of your child, you don't have multiple nurses taking care of dozens of children, because it's very easy at that point to just not learn the child themselves and instead just look at children in a generalized way rather than as individuals and to score them thus. And that doesn't help. That's not going to solve the situation. You're inevitably going to start scoring children in a way that would keep them on medication longer than they should be, and others take them off faster than they should. I mean, it's ripe for those kinds of problems. And that's exactly what happened with us. You know, they would I mean, we were all for them taking the medication off as quickly as possible, believe me. But there were times where I just sat there scratching my head, where I would come in off work and visit, and we'd be talking to, oh yeah, we took her down, and it would be some, drastic, like they just took the floor out from under her, but then the next couple days, we got to go slow, just totally irrational. Like it's very obvious that there are multiple minds at work here and zero communication between any of them. And none of them know that her name is Emma. It's just baby in that room. Um, don't ever let your child go into a NICU that is run and scored by the Finnegan scoring system. Um, Ask about that. If your child has to be in a NICU and there's some sort of medication that they have to be weaned off of, ask what system they use. If it's the ESC, the Eat, Sleep, Cuddle, that's a good thing. That means that there's just going to be one or two nurses, three or four at the most, that handle your child, and only those nurses, and that they keep them in a quiet room. They don't score them. They only give them medication like morphine or something if they absolutely have to. If the child is inconsolable for like 10 to 15 minutes and there's nothing they can do to calm them down, then they give them a dose. In the Finnegan scoring system, they give them a dose, and then the next morning they give them that same dose again, and then the weaning begins. Well, in the ESC, and I know I'm rambling here and getting confusing, but it is important for anyone that's in this situation. With the Eat, Sleep, Cuddle method, they'll give them morphine only if they absolutely have to. And then the next morning, they reassess the situation. So if she's calmed down a little bit, they don't give her any at all. It's not the same dose again, so that then, after a couple days of that, you're stuck with a weaning system to avoid withdrawal, which just prolongs your child being in the hospital. It is absolutely insane. Um, yeah, if you get stuck in a situation where your child has to go into a NICU, ask them what scoring system they're using. If it's the Finnegan scoring system, it's been implemented since the 1970s. Doctors are rejecting it across the country because it's archaic and it's entirely subjective. In fact, I wish I had it in front of me, but there was a medical student, you can find this online, who did her term paper, her thesis, her doctorate, I guess, was on the Finnegan scoring system, and I can't remember. I read her entire paper. It was 17, 18 pages long, her doctorate, and I can't remember how wide ranging her study was, but she basically quizzed, anonymously quizzed nurses, I guess within her region, the hospitals within her state or something like that, um, and asked them a whole series of questions about their what they thought of the Finnegan scoring system. I mean, 60% of the nurses scored or that answered the questions said that they felt the Finnegan scoring system was far too subjective. It was up around 50, 60% that felt they were not adequately trained to score babies according to that system. I mean, there was 40% that felt like some of the questions in or some of the the things that the babies are graded on, like irritability, felt that they were unnecessary. And I mean, it was these high numbers of nurses that just obviously have zero faith in the scoring system itself. And these are the same nurses that then have to use that scoring system on a daily basis on your child. I mean, that would not give me great confidence that my child is getting the care that they would need, that nurses, over half, 60%, feel that this Finnegan scoring system is far too subjective and that they are not trained adequately enough to implement that scoring system. That should give you no confidence whatsoever. And then when you have nurses just not communicating in between shifts as to your basic needs of your child, how they're fed, their sleeping patterns, just what happened on a previous shift according to this one. They claim when you challenge them and when you confront them, they claim that, oh, we communicate, we talk about these things. But in practice, in action, it is so obvious that there is no communication whatsoever. The tiny bit that may take place is so irrelevant, and it's usually negative information that is actually going to prolong your child's visit rather than get them out the door on a timely manner. Um, I know this wasn't probably the most palatable episode. You know, there's a lot of things I'm sure you want to hear me talk about, you know, in politics or something else like that in the culture. Kobe Bryant died. The Democrats are always trying to get Trump, you know, blah, blah, blah. But this is what's been going on in my world for the past month. And thank the Lord it's over as far as the hospital, Hershey Hospital, is concerned. But our daughter's now here home and healthy and happy and all that kind of stuff. No thanks to them. But you know, people watch the episodes I put out. You know, some people do, and if you're in that situation, I want you to be aware that, you know, ask them, you know, what scoring system do you use in your NICU, and if it's the Finnegan, put your child somewhere else. I mean, you might as well just write it off that they're going to be there for a freaking month. So. Anyway, that's our episode for this week. Now that my daughter's home and things are slowly beginning to return to normal, I say slowly, we'll be able to get an episode out every week now, again, like we were doing before. So thank you for your patience and for hanging in there. I know it's been a couple weeks since I've been able to, I think for the past month and a half, every 2 weeks I've put out an episode or so instead of every week like I was doing. So yeah, thanks for hanging in there, and we'll be returning back to our regularly scheduled. I can't even think. I'm so tired. Program or pattern. I don't know. I don't sleep anymore because we have a baby. Anyway, good night and God be with you.